No. News. No. News. No. News. You guys remember when a bunch of stuff happened in January of 2020? And now February's happened and it feels like nothing's happened at all? I mean, geez, like there's been no General Nintendo Direct that's happened yet. No PlayStation 5 announcement, no Xbox Series X announcement. It's getting to me, man. But you know what? That's the present, let's not mope over it. Let's go back and let's talk about some hypotheticals, about a subject that my audience very well knows me for. And that is the Grinch Leak. I'm still looking into the Grinch Leak, still reading forum discussions about it and stuff. But in a lot of these discussions, I've noticed a lot of people have been saying that they prefer the Grinch Leak roster over the actual, final base game and DLC roster that we have now. And it's an interesting thought because even though I feel content with everything from that November 2018 Direct going forward in terms of the actual character choices, barring one. And so that kind of made me really rethink about what makes a good Smash character, and also sort of what makes me think about a good overall new character lineup in Smash Brothers. And so I think the only way for us to really talk about this is I think we gotta compare the characters, Grinch Leak versus the actual ones we have now, in a head-to-head comparison. So let's lay some ground rules down first about how we're going to compare them. So the Grinch Leak had 7 characters in it, and since the Grinch Leak came out, we've had, 8 characters. So that would put us right up to, DLC fighter number 4, Terry Bogard. And I don't want to do any sort of 8 versus 7 because that would be an unfair numerical comparison, and I don't want to shuffle around a bunch of characters to try to fit certain ones in versus out. So I'm putting the cutoff at Bailiff. So Bailiff's not getting in. I'm sorry, dude, but I don't think it would have made that much of a difference in the first place. And much like in math, how you compare 2 expressions, you eliminate the things they have in common first before you get to work. We're gonna have to eliminate Ken and Banjo from these comparisons because they're both in the Grinch Leak and also actual characters. So that leaves us with 5 characters for both sets. So what I've lovingly called Team Grinch, the Grinch Leak, what do we call them? Victims? Because we call Banjo a survivor. Anyways, so we have Gino from Super Mario RPG, Shadow from Sonic the Hedgehog, we have Chorus Kids from Rhythm Heaven, we have Mach Rider from Mach Rider, and then we have Isaac from Golden Sun. And just to make things easy, I know Shadow would be a really easy Echo Fighter, but for the sake of making easy comparisons, let's just assume that he's a semi-clone different enough from Sonic to essentially be his own character. So that way we have completely unique characters against completely unique characters. And what we have on Team Fighters Pass, as I like to call it, actual characters that we have in real life. We have Incineroar from Pokemon Sun and Moon. We have Piranha Plant from the Super Mario Bros. Series. We have Joker from Persona 5, the Hero from Dragon Quest, and Terry Bogard from Fatal Fury. So the first thing you might be asking yourself is, Power Man, why the hell are you even comparing these two? Isn't it pretty much impossible to compare tangible characters that we can play right now and fever dreams that were never likely going to happen and are only potential and not any execution? And you know what? You're right, it is difficult. Both sides do have, a sort of bias aspect to them. The characters that we have now, we have a bias for them. Even if we don't like characters like Hero or Terry, that the fact that we play against them or we play as them and stuff, and we see them a bunch, we're exposed to them a bunch, we have a sort of bias for that already, for things that actually exist. And on the flip side, there also can be a bias the other way, that we can have a bias for potential, the unknown, the mystique. Some people enjoy the allure of asking for a character and the satisfaction of getting them revealed more than playing the actual character themselves. So we really do have to take that into consideration. Now moving on, let's get into probably the hardest topic of this entire video. I just want to get it out of the way, is the potential mechanics slash movesets of both of these teams compared to each other. Now with Team Grinch, you have to really start getting into some sort of theory crafting level of stuff about sort of the movesets that you could come up with for all the characters and what would best represent them while also being the most fun possible. And obviously it's very hard to communicate sort of the exact way that would work between you and me because we're both different people. My idea of what the Chorus Kids would be different from what your idea of the Chorus Kids would be. Now, if you really like drill down, I think that Team Grinch on paper compared to Team Fighters Pass on paper, that I think, at least in sort of the uniqueness department, and maybe even a little bit in terms of how fun it is to play against department, I think Team Grinch just barely edges out ahead. And I think the character that puts it over the edge for me for Team Grinch, at least on paper, surprisingly is Mach Rider. Now originally I was going to say here that Masahiro Sakurai has said that, oh, he wanted to excite Biker and Melee with a whole motorcycle moveset, but it turns out that that information is bullshit. There's no evidence that this statement ever existed. So instead though, Mach Rider on the Grinch Leak does have his motorcycle with him. So, you know, I like to think that he could have potentially had a motorcycle-related moveset. And so, when you think about that, and you extrapolate that into a potential moveset, I really think that could be super unique and also potentially super fun. But that's just on paper, right? Like, there's a reason why Excite Biker didn't get into Melee, and why we haven't had a character exclusively ride a motorcycle up to this point, because they just haven't found the ability to make it work. And the closest character I guess you could compare to Mach Rider that currently exists is Bowser Jr., because he's in his clown car, but that takes up a much smaller sort of footprint on the stage in general. And while we're talking about sort of practical implementation, we have to acknowledge that 3 out of the 5 characters on Team Fighters Pass are DLC characters. And we all know about DLC privilege, that because these characters are DLC, that they get a little something extra with them, right? They get extra mechanics and extra things going on to make them interesting and stand out, so people will buy them. And assuming Team Grinch was real, they would have all been on the base roster. And so, to me, it kind of makes me question, would Isaac have been as fun as someone like Hero, who gets this crazy down B mechanic with all these weird magic spells and stuff, right? I don't think so. But you know what? Considering how well the Smash team does even base game characters, I would say that that gap is like very small between the two. Now next up is personality. And personality, we really don't think about unless it's gone, because like characters, the way they present themselves and the way they act during battles, like really sort of draws us into why we like these characters, right? Even competitive players, you know, who aren't using items and aren't just sort of sitting around watching idle animations for a long time, like they like a lot of these characters' expressions and mannerisms. And if you want to see an example of why personality is important, just look at Corrin, okay? Corrin has the personality of a piece of cardboard, okay? Like, people didn't like Corrin when Corrin was good in Smash 4. And so for Team Grinch, like, even though the characters aren't in the game, that they have personalities that exist in their own games. So assuming that we can extrapolate sort of the best representation of their personality into Smash Brothers, like, who would win? Now for me personally, between Hero and Joker on Team Fighters Pass and Isaac and Gino on Team Grinch, they all have about the same amount of personality between them. And I find that kind of funny because they're all JRPG characters. characters. And I know people are gonna say, well, Gino has so much more personality, that's why people like him, right? And I agree, Gino has a ton of personality. But Hero has 3 other costumes with 3 other voices and their own sort of little eccentricities. But I really have to give it to Team Fighter's Pass for giving us grade A, standout, personality-driven characters like Piranha Plant, Incineroar, and Terry Bogard. Like, Piranha Plant runs with his tongue out. Like, you know, like, how do you compete with that? How do you compete with Incineroar, you know, showing off after every move he does, and Terry Bogard's spectacular English? And yeah, while we have Mach Rider as a dark horse, you know, even if we assumed, right, that Mach Rider was the most charismatic character in the entire game, that somehow Mach Rider was more charismatic than Captain Falcon even, that Shadow the Hedgehog, you know, a character who, like, isn't, like, the most fun personality. We've kind of seen that with Dark Pit already, and the Chorus Kids, which has potential to be annoying and, like, inoffensive at best. Like, I really don't think that these characters are pushing it over the line for me personally. And then finally, representation. Which set of these characters are the best representations of what Smash is, and also sort of what they represent in and of themselves? You know, I used to think that I didn't care about representation of gaming franchises overall in Smash Brothers. And then they added an 8th Fire Emblem character to the game. Now, again, this is, you know, a very close race. And if you have different philosophies, like, you can argue one over the other either way, and they both have really equal points between each other. Now, if you come at it from a utilitarian perspective about, you know, we're gonna make the most amount of people happy possible, then Team Fighter's Pass just wins by a landslide. No contest even. Again, don't get me wrong, Team Grinch has some really fun characters on it, but a lot of them are deep cuts from, like, D and E tier Nintendo franchises, right? If we're looking at it from a utilitarian perspective, the characters that are in Team Fighter's Pass, they just appeal to way more people. Hell, even if it was just Hero on Team Fighter's Pass, they would still win by a landslide, because that's how much Dragon Quest is loved in Japan. However, sheer numbers aren't everything. But one of the best things about Smash Brothers, and one of the most fan-pleasing things that it does, is it takes game characters that aren't necessarily the most mainstream and brings them in and really makes them sort of a household name in gaming. You take characters like Captain Falcon and Bayonetta and King K. Rool, characters who have had, you know, maybe not the most success. Maybe they're, you know, they haven't had a game in a long time, right? You take these characters and you expose them to millions of people, and people really love these characters. They love their designs, they love their movesets, and they want to play these games and learn a ton about them. That's really kind of a lot of the magic of Smash Brothers. And so characters like Isaac and Gino and the Chorus Kids, those really are the perfect example of characters fighting against the odds. Characters that are good, and characters that are cool, and characters whose games are cool, that would really highly benefit from being in Smash and more people playing their games. So from that perspective, Team Grinch would be the winner. But it's just really hard to compare the two. I think it's just really a preference of taste of the way that you prefer that Smash represents gaming overall. So if you're somebody who prefers Smash Brothers to be more a celebration of Nintendo and Nintendo's gaming history, and you love more of those deep cut kind of characters, you know, those characters that from series that you really love, that you wish more people would know about, then I really couldn't blame you for preferring the Grinch Leak characters over what we've gotten. So if you prefer Smash Bros. To be more of a celebration of gaming overall. And third-party characters really get you going and really get you pumped, and you really kind of like that hype train, sort of who could it be? It could be anyone aspect of Smash Brothers. Then I really can't blame you for preferring the current roster that we have now. The previous two categories being so incredibly close to each other that if you're not hyper nitpicky about things, that, you know, it really is just a matter of personal preference and taste. So where do I land, I guess, on this scale? Do I prefer what we have now versus, you know, sort of what could have been on the Grinch Leak? At least for me personally, I prefer what we have now. I try not to get myself caught up in what could have been and stuff like that. I'm trying to get sort of that out of my mind and stuff, but in general, I just kind of prefer the third-party characters overall. I mean, my favorite DLC character was Hero, so what does that say about my taste? So that's it for this video. I'm actually using a script for the first time. I know, right? You could totally tell my previous videos didn't have a script. And so I wrote this script today, and I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm just gonna go for it and film it and talk about all these things, and hopefully this makes a really good video in editing. So anyways, guys, that's it, and have a good day.